The air in Mr. Henderson's office was stale, thick with the scent of old paper and unspoken finality. Daniel sat perfectly still, his hands resting on his knees, his back a rigid line against the stiff leather of the visitor's chair. Outside, the city hummed with life, a vibrant pulse he was no longer a part of. Mr. Henderson, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with a look of mild disappointment, cleared his throat. The sound was like gravel grinding together. "Daniel, you've been a dedicated employee for 15 years. This is difficult." Daniel said nothing. He had learned long ago that silence was his best defense in a world that always seemed to have too much to say. He simply watched the older man, his gaze steady, waiting for the axe to fall. It had been hovering for weeks, a shadow in the hallways, a whisper in the break room. "The company is restructuring," Henderson continued, avoiding Daniel's eyes. He fiddled with a pen on his vast mahogany desk. "Synergies are being optimized, redundancies are being eliminated." The words were cold, corporate jargon designed to cushion a brutal blow. They offered no comfort. Daniel felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were watching a movie about someone else. 15 years. He had given them his youth, his loyalty, his unwavering diligence. He had worked weekends, missed anniversaries, poured his life into the firm, all for a series of sterile, meaningless words. "Your position has been deemed redundant," Henderson finally said, the words landing with a dull thud in the quiet room. He pushed a thick, cream-colored envelope across the desk. It slid to a stop just inches from Daniel's hands. "This is your severance package. It's all in there. The terms, the final figures, and a non-disclosure agreement you'll need to sign." Daniel looked at the envelope. It seemed impossibly heavy, a tombstone for his career. He did not reach for it. His mind was a sudden, roaring blank, fired. The word echoed in the void. After all this time, he was being discarded like a broken tool. He finally rose from the chair, his movements stiff and mechanical. He picked up the envelope. It was heavier than he expected, dense and official. He gave a short, jerky nod to Henderson, a man he had once respected, and walked out of the office without a word. He didn't look back. The walk through the office was a blur of averted gazes and feigned busyness. Faces that had smiled at him yesterday now found fascinating patterns on their computer screens. The silence that followed him was louder than any jeer. It was the sound of his professional death. He drove home on autopilot, the city lights smearing into long, wet streaks of color. Rain began to fall, tapping a somber rhythm on the windshield. Each tap felt like a tiny hammer against his skull. What would he tell Clara, his wife? She valued success and image above all else. His steady, if unspectacular job had been a source of quiet contention for years. It was stable, respectable, but it wasn't flashy. It didn't come with the kind of title or salary that her friends' husbands boasted about. How would she react to this? To him, a failure? A knot of dread tightened in his stomach, far colder and heavier than the shock of being fired. He parked the car in the driveway of their pristine suburban home, a house Clara had insisted upon, in a neighborhood she had chosen for its social cachet. For a long moment he just sat there, the engine ticking as it cooled, the rain drumming on the roof. The thick envelope lay on the passenger seat, a silent, ominous passenger. Taking a deep breath, he grabbed the envelope and got out of the car. The rain plastered his hair to his forehead. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. He fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking slightly, and finally pushed the door open. The house was unnaturally quiet. "Clara?" he called out, his voice sounding hollow in the grand two-story foyer. She emerged from the living room, not moving toward him, but standing by the archway, her arms crossed. She was dressed impeccably, as always, in a sharp blazer and tailored slacks. Her expression was unreadable, a mask of cool neutrality. "You're home early," she stated. It was not a question. We need to talk," Daniel began, his throat dry. He held up the envelope slightly, a pathetic offering. "Something happened at work." Clara's lips curved into a small, cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was a smile he had seen before, usually when she was about to deliver a particularly cutting remark. "I know," she said. "Marcus called me." Marcus? Her brother? His contact at the firm, a junior executive in another department, had always been a snake. Of course, he would be the one to deliver the news, likely with a generous helping of glee. "He said they were letting you go," Clara continued, her voice devoid of any sympathy. It was flat, analytical, like a scientist observing a failed experiment. "Finally! Finally!" Daniel echoed, the word a raw wound. "Clara, I lost my job. 15 years. 15 years of mediocrity," she cut in, her voice sharp as broken glass. 15 years of you being content to just be adequate. I have been waiting, Daniel. I have been waiting for the day this comfortable little charade of yours would finally fall apart. The cruelty of it stole his breath. He stared at her, the woman he had shared a bed with for a decade, and saw a complete stranger, a cold, calculating stranger who was looking at him with undisguised contempt. "What are you talking about?" he whispered, the rain dripping from his coat onto the polished hardwood floor. She walked over to the ornate console table by the stairs and picked up a manila folder of her own. She held it out to him. Her movements were precise, theatrical. "I'm talking about this," she said. "I had my lawyer draw these up weeks ago. I was just waiting for the right moment. And you, my dear, have finally provided it." He took the folder numbly. His fingers felt like clumsy blocks of wood. He opened it. The words at the top of the page leaped out at him, stark and brutal. Petition for dissolution of marriage, divorce papers, the day he was fired, the very same day. The world tilted on its axis, a nauseating lurch that left him reeling. He looked from the papers back to her face. The mask had fallen away, replaced by an expression of triumphant disdain. "You can't be serious," he stammered.
"Oh, I have never been more serious in my life," she sneered. "I married you believing you had ambition, potential. Instead, you were happy to be a cog in a machine. I will not be dragged down with you. I will not be the wife of a failed, unemployed man." The envelope from his company suddenly felt 10 times heavier in his other hand. His entire life was contained in 2 documents, one ending his career, the other ending his marriage, both delivered on the same cruel afternoon.
"So that's it?" he asked, his voice cracking. 10 years of marriage, you throw it away because I lost my job." "I'm not throwing it away," she corrected him, a chilling glint in her eyes. "I'm upgrading this house, the savings, the assets. They are all tied to your employment, an employment you no longer have. The court will see that I am entitled to security. I will get the house. You, Daniel, will get what you deserve. Nothing." She gestured toward the door with a flick of her wrist. "I've already had your things packed. They're in the garage. I want you out. Tonight." It was a devastating 1-2 punch of unimaginable cruelty. Fired, divorced, evicted, all in the span of a few hours. He stood there, dripping water on the floor, the 2 envelopes in his hands, a symbol of his complete and utter ruin. He felt a profound emptiness, a hollowing out of his very soul. He looked at Clara one last time, at her smug, victorious face. He saw no love, no regret, no sadness, only cold, hard ambition. He turned and walked back out the door into the cold, cleansing rain, not even bothering to close it behind him. He left the life he knew shattered on the floor behind him. The cheap motel room smelled of disinfectant and despair. The floral-patterned bedspread was thin and scratchy. The single window looked out onto a crumbling brick wall, and the television buzzed with a constant low-level static. It was a universe away from the polished, silent grandeur of the home he had left only hours ago. Daniel sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, the Severance envelope still clutched in his hand. He hadn't opened it yet. He was almost afraid to. It felt like the final nail in the coffin of his old life. To open it would be to accept that everything was truly over. His mind replayed the scene with Clara on a torturous loop. Her cold smile, her triumphant words, "I have been waiting." The phrase echoed in his head, each repetition chipping away at the memories of their life together, revealing the rotten core beneath the glossy surface. He thought back over the years, and suddenly countless small moments snapped into sharp, painful focus. The anniversary dinner where she had sighed with disappointment at the simple, heartfelt necklace he'd bought her. "It's lovely, Daniel," she had said, her tone implying the exact opposite. "But it doesn't exactly scream success, does it?" He remembered the family gatherings where her brother Marcus would hold court, boasting about his latest deal or his new sports car. Marcus would clap Daniel on the back, his smile laced with pity. "Still holding down the fort at the old firm, eh, Danny? Good for you. Someone's got to do the real work, while the rest of us are out making real money." Clara would just laugh, a light, tinkling sound that now seemed horribly sinister. She never defended him, not once. She would just watch, her eyes appraising him, and he could almost see the silent calculations, the weighing and measuring. He had always told himself it was just her way, that she was just more focused on appearances. He had been a fool. He had mistaken her ambition for a shared goal and her criticism for motivation. In reality, he had just been a placeholder, a stepping stone she had tolerated until he was no longer useful. His steady job had provided the foundation for the lifestyle she craved, but he himself had never been enough. His firing wasn't the cause of the divorce, it was merely the excuse she had been waiting for. A wave of cold fury, so intense it was almost dizzying, washed over him, momentarily eclipsing the grief. It was a foreign feeling. Daniel was not an angry man. He was patient, enduring, calm, but the sheer, calculated cruelty of her actions had ignited something dormant within him. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text from Clara. He hesitated, then picked it up. "Hope you found a suitably pathetic place to stay. Don't forget my lawyer will be in touch. I want this over with quickly." Another message came through a moment later. It was from Marcus. "Hey pal, heard what happened. Tough break. Clara's a shark, you know, always has been. Better to just give her what she wants and move on. No hard feelings." No hard feelings. The casual condescension was like salt in an open wound. They were celebrating. He could picture it perfectly. Clara and Marcus at a fancy restaurant, sipping expensive wine, toasting to his downfall and their good fortune. They were picking over the bones of his life before it was even cold. They thought he was broken, a pathetic, unemployed failure with nothing to his name. They were so sure of their victory, so confident in his weakness. They saw him as a bug to be squashed under the heel of their ambition. His grip tightened on the thick envelope in his hand. Henderson's words came back to him. It's all in there. The finality of it, but also the weight of it. It had felt too heavy for a simple termination letter. With a sudden, decisive movement, Daniel ripped the seal. His fingers were clumsy, but driven by a new, urgent need to know. He would face this. He would face all of it. He pulled out a sheaf of papers, far more than he expected. The first page was a standard letter of termination, formal and cold. He scanned it quickly. The second page was the non-disclosure agreement Henderson had mentioned, full of dense legal paragraphs. But underneath that was something else. It was a single sheet of heavy bond paper, embossed with the logo of a company he didn't recognize, Orion Global Acquisitions. The letter was brief and direct. It was an invitation to a private and confidential meeting the following morning at the downtown offices of a prestigious law firm. It mentioned his transition from the company and the finalization of the Orion Protocol. It was signed by a name he had never seen before, the Chief Executive Officer of Orion Global. This was not a standard severance. He leafed through the rest of the documents. There were financial statements, stock agreements, and pages of legal text so complex he couldn't begin to understand them. But he understood the numbers. He saw figures with so many zeros after them that they seemed unreal. A flicker of something, not hope, it was too early for that, but of intense, burning curiosity sparked to life within him. What was this? What was the Orion Protocol? Why was a massive acquisitions firm involved in the firing of a mid-level manager? The dread in his stomach began to recede, replaced by a sharp, focused energy. Clara and Marcus thought they knew what had happened. They thought he was a casualty of corporate restructuring. They saw a man who had been fired, who had been... But as Daniel stared at the mysterious letter, a new, radical thought began to form. What if he hadn't just been fired? What if he had been bought out? The law offices of Sterling, Cromwell, and Finch were the physical embodiment of old money and immense power. The lobby was a cavern of marble and polished brass, hushed and intimidating. Daniel, dressed in his only good suit, which now felt slightly too big for him, felt out of place, a ghost haunting a palace of the living. He announced himself to the receptionist, a woman with an impossibly serene expression, and was immediately escorted to a conference room on the top floor. The room had a single, massive window that offered a panoramic view of the entire city, a God's eye perspective that made the world below seem small and insignificant. A man was already waiting for him, standing by the window with his back to the door. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than Daniel's car. He turned as Daniel entered, and his face broke into a warm, disarming smile. "Daniel, it's a pleasure to finally meet you. I'm Robert Harrison." He extended a hand. His grip was firm and confident. "I'm senior counsel for Orion Global. Please have a seat. Can I get you some coffee? Water?" "Water would be fine, thank you," Daniel said, his voice steadier than he felt. He sat down at the vast, polished table, placing the thick envelope from his firing on the gleaming surface in front of him. Mr. Harrison sat opposite him, his demeanor calm and professional, yet with an undercurrent of something else. Excitement, perhaps. "I imagine you have a lot of questions," he began, leaning forward slightly. "That's an understatement," Daniel replied, his gaze unwavering. "I was fired yesterday. Today I'm in a meeting that feels like it's several levels above my pay grade. I'd like to know what's going on." Harrison smiled again. "Let me be direct, Daniel. You weren't fired, not in the traditional sense. Your former company was the subject of a quiet, high-level acquisition by Orion Global. The deal was finalized 2 months ago, but it has been kept completely secret to prevent market instability." Daniel listened, his mind racing. A secret acquisition. That explained the strange atmosphere at the office, the whispers, the tension. "Orion's business model involves streamlining and modernizing our acquisitions," Harrison continued. "That means a top-to-bottom overhaul of personnel. However, For a company of that size, mass layoffs would trigger a stock panic and alert our competitors. So we enacted what we call the Orion Protocol. He paused, letting the words sink in. The protocol identifies key long-term employees, individuals with deep institutional knowledge, stable careers, and a high degree of loyalty. People who, if they all suddenly left, would raise red flags. People like you, Daniel. So you fired us quietly one by one? Daniel asked. We terminated your contracts, Harrison corrected him gently. But firing loyal, long-term employees creates disgruntled loose cannons. The Orion Protocol is more elegant. We don't fire you, we buy your silence and your departure. Your severance package isn't severance, it's a golden parachute. Harrison reached into his own briefcase and pulled out a document, sliding it across the table. It was a summary statement. Daniel looked down, and his breath caught in his throat. The numbers were staggering, incomprehensible. There was a lump sum payment for the termination of his contract that was in the millions. Below that was a transfer of vested stock options, not in his old company, but in the parent conglomerate, Orion Global itself. The valuation was astronomical. This can't be right, Daniel whispered, his finger tracing a number with 7 zeros. It's absolutely right, Harrison confirmed, his voice matter-of-fact. You've been with the company for 15 years, Daniel. You were a model employee. Your contract had longevity clauses you probably forgot about years ago. When Orion acquired the company, we also acquired its contractual obligations. It was, legally and financially, cheaper to pay you this amount under a strict non-disclosure agreement than to risk the fallout of a messy public termination. Daniel leaned back in his chair, feeling light-headed. He was rich, not just comfortable, not just well-off. He was suddenly, absurdly, fantastically wealthy. The irony was so thick he could barely breathe. Yesterday, he was a failure. Today, he was a multimillionaire. But Harrison wasn't finished. There is one more thing, he said, his expression becoming more serious. It's a rather unique detail of your particular contract, the matter of your primary residence. Daniel's heart clenched. The house. The Stid, Clara's triumphant sneer, as she declared she would get it. What about it? Your home was part of an old executive housing program established in the 90s, Harrison explained, pulling out another file. The company purchased the properties as long-term assets. You lived there under a heavily subsidized corporate lease agreement, not a traditional mortgage. It was a perk of your position. So the company owns the house, Daniel said, his stomach sinking. Clara would be kicked out, but he wouldn't get it either. It's more complicated than that, Harrison said, a glint in his eye. The program was designed to retain top talent. It included a very specific clause. In the event of a contract termination without cause or as part of a corporate restructuring, which your situation falls under, the lease is terminated. However, the deed of ownership does not revert to the company. It reverts to a private trust. He opened the file and turned it around for Daniel to see. It was a deed, along with the legal framework for a trust. This trust was created on your first day of employment 15 years ago, as per the housing agreement. Its sole beneficiary is you, and as of yesterday at 5 o'clock, upon the termination of your contract, full and unencumbered ownership of the property at 124 Chestnut Lane was transferred to this trust. He tapped a line on the page with his finger. Congratulations, Daniel. You don't just have millions of dollars. You are the sole ironclad owner of the house. Your wife is currently living in a property that belongs 100% to you. The world stopped. The entire elaborate stage of Clara's victory, the house, the assets, her secure future, was built on a foundation of sand. She thought she was kicking him out of their house. She had no idea she was a guest in his. The shock gave way to a cold, crystalline clarity. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, forming a picture of breathtaking poetic justice. Clara, so obsessed with status and wealth, had hitched her wagon to what she thought was a dying horse, only to find out it was a secret titan. And in her haste to abandon ship, she had thrown herself overboard, leaving him in sole command of the vessel. Daniel looked at Mr. Harrison, the architect of this stunning revelation. He saw not just a lawyer, but an ally, a facilitator. He took a slow, deep breath, the stale air of the motel room replaced by the rarefied atmosphere of power. The grief and humiliation of the past 24 hours were burned away, cauterized by the white-hot flame of this new reality. The sleeping giant inside him was finally, irrevocably awake. "Mr. Harrison," Daniel said, his voice low and steady, a tone he had never used before. "I'm going to need a personal lawyer. I believe my wife has just filed for divorce." The decision settled over Daniel not like a weight, but like a suit of armor. For the first time in a decade, he felt perfectly, completely in control. The man who had walked into this office, a victim adrift in the wreckage of his life, was gone. In his place sat a man with a purpose, forged in the fires of betrayal and armed with an arsenal he never knew he possessed. He looked across the table at Robert Harrison, whose professional smile had been replaced by a look of keen, intelligent interest. "Are you available for retainer?" Daniel asked, the question crisp and direct. Harrison leaned back, a slow, appreciative grin spreading across his face. "For a case like this, Daniel, I would clear my schedule. This is the kind of work a lawyer dreams of." "Good," Daniel said. He pushed the documents back toward the lawyer. "I want you to handle everything, the trusts, the investments, and the divorce." He paused, his eyes hardening. "My wife believes I am destitute. I want her to continue believing that for as long as possible." "An excellent strategy," Harrison agreed, his mind already working, piecing together the legal chess moves. Her entire petition will be based on a false premise. Her greed will be her own undoing. We will let her build her entire case on your supposed poverty. When we reveal the truth, her credibility and her entire claim will be annihilated in court. They spent the next 2 hours mapping out the plan. It was not a plan of revenge, Daniel told himself, but a plan for justice. It would be surgical, methodical, and devastating. They would use the system Clara worshipped, the system of money and law, to dismantle her world piece by piece. "First," Harrison declared, making notes on a legal pad, "we establish your new financial baseline. We'll set you up in a comfortable but discreet apartment. No sudden displays of wealth. To the world, and especially to Clara, you are a man who has lost everything." "Done," Daniel agreed. He had no interest in flashy cars or designer clothes. That was Clara's world, a world he was now happy to leave behind. "Second," Harrison continued, his pen scratching across the paper, "we sever her financial lifelines, joint credit cards, supplementary accounts, any benefits tied to your old employment. They all get cut off immediately. We need to remove her access to the resources she believes she is entitled to." Daniel thought of Clara at the boutique, her casual cruelty, her sense of entitlement. A cold smile touched his own lips. "Do it." "Third, and most critically, the house," Harrison said, tapping his pen on the deed. "We will have a formal legal notice of lease termination and notice to vacate delivered to the property, addressed to current occupants. It will be cold, official, and come from a corporate entity she won't recognize, the holding company that now manages the trust. It will confuse her and her lawyer, and they will waste time and resources trying to fight a ghost." "And the divorce filing?" Daniel asked. "We respond, but we play for time," Harrison explained. We will file a response that acknowledges the petition but contests the distribution of assets based on anticipated future changes in financial standing. It's vague enough to be permissible, but it will drive her lawyer insane. We reveal nothing about your true net worth until the mediation. We let her walk into that room completely blind and completely confident. There was one last piece. Daniel hesitated for a moment, then looked at Harrison. My wife's brother, Marcus. He works at a financial firm. I've overheard him boasting about creative accounting and making problems disappear for his clients. He was complicit in this. He enjoyed it. Harrison's eyes lit up with a predatory gleam. An anonymous, well-documented tip to the Internal Revenue Service is often a very effective tool for correcting moral imbalances. I have contacts who specialize in ensuring such tips are taken very, very seriously. The plan was set. It was elegant, ruthless, and beautiful in its precision. It used Clara's and Marcus's own arrogance as the primary weapon against them. Their belief in their own superiority would be the very thing that sealed their doom. Daniel stood up and extended his hand to Harrison. Thank you, he said. It felt inadequate, but the look of mutual understanding that passed between them said more than words ever could. The pleasure is all mine, Daniel, Harrison said, shaking his hand. Now let's get to work. Harrison made the first call right there in front of him to the central bank that managed the corporate credit accounts. With a few curt, authoritative sentences, he had every card linked to Daniel's old life frozen and cancelled. The first domino had been pushed. Daniel walked out of the law office and into the bright afternoon sun. He felt like a different man. The city skyline no longer seemed intimidating. It looked like a kingdom, and for the first time, he felt like he held the keys. He spent the rest of the day following Harrison's instructions. He leased a clean, modern apartment in a quiet, unassuming building across town. He opened a new bank account, separate from everything he had shared with Clara. He bought new clothes, simple and functional. He was building a new life from the ground up, while the demolition of his old one was quietly set in motion. That evening, sitting in his new, empty apartment, looking out at a view of a quiet park, his phone buzzed. It was Clara. He let it go to voicemail. He already knew what she would say. The first wave of her panic was about to crash against the silent, unbreachable wall he had just constructed, and he felt nothing but a profound, chilling sense of peace. Clara breezed into Lapel, her favorite high-end boutique, with the air of a conquering queen. The humiliation of having to deal with Daniel's pathetic firing was behind her. Now came the enjoyable part, spending the money she would soon have full control over.
Isabel, darling, she called out to the store manager, who immediately scurried over, her face wreathed in a practiced, deferential smile. I saw the new winter collection online. I want to see the crimson cashmere coat and the matching leather handbag. Of course, Madame Dubois, Isabel cooed, leading her to a private viewing area. An exquisite choice. It just arrived. Clara spent a blissful hour trying on clothes, basking in the fawning attention. She felt alive, powerful. She was shedding her old life like a snake sheds its skin, and her new one was going to be fabulous. She finally settled on the coat, the handbag, a pair of Italian boots, and a silk scarf. The total was obscene, and it thrilled her. "I'll take all of it," she announced, handing Isabel the platinum card linked to what she still thought of as Daniel's executive account. She imagined him in some filthy motel, eating canned soup, and a cruel smirk played on her lips.
This was her reward for 10 years of wasted time. Isabel ran the card. A moment passed. She frowned and ran it again. "I'm sorry, Madame Dubois, there seems to be an issue. The card has been declined." Clara's smile froze. "What? That's impossible. Run it again. Isabel ran it a third time, the same result. It says the account has been suspended, she said, her voice now cooler, her deferential smile tightening. The other wealthy patrons in the store were beginning to notice, their conversations dropping to a murmur. That's ridiculous! A mistake! Clara snapped, her face flushing with anger and embarrassment. She fumbled in her purse for another card, a joint savings account. Here, use this one. Isabel took it. The result was the same. Declined. Panic, hot and sharp, pierced through Clara's composure. She tried a third card, her personal credit card, which was paid off every month by a direct transfer from the main account. Declined. Account frozen. The manager's expression had now shifted to one of thinly veiled suspicion. The other customers were openly staring. The beautiful clothes suddenly felt like a costume for a fool. Humiliation washed over her in a sickening wave. I'll have my bank sort this out, Clara stammered, grabbing her purse. Hold the items for me. She turned and fled the store, the whispers and stares following her like a physical blow. As soon as she was in her car, she furiously dialed the bank. After navigating a maze of automated menus, she finally got a human being on the line. His voice was polite, robotic, and utterly unhelpful. Yes, ma'am, I see the accounts here. They were all suspended this afternoon by order of the primary account holder. The primary account holder? That's my husband. He can't do that. She shrieked into the phone. According to our records, ma'am, as the sole signatory on the corporate accounts, he has every right, the man replied placidly. I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do. She disconnected the call, her hands shaking with rage. Daniel? Pathetic, spineless Daniel had done this. How dare he? This was a desperate, petty act of a broken man. She immediately called him, ready to unleash a torrent of abuse. The call went straight to voicemail. Daniel, you pathetic worm, she screamed into the phone. You think cutting off my cards is going to stop me? You are nothing. This only proves what a vindictive little man you are. My lawyer will tear you to shreds for this. She drove home in a blind fury, her mind racing. This was just a temporary setback, a childish tantrum. Once her lawyer got involved, he would put Daniel back in his place. He would be forced to reinstate everything. She slammed the door of the house behind her, the grand foyer doing little to soothe her frayed nerves. On the console table, where she had left the divorce papers for Daniel, another envelope sat waiting. It was from a courier, a stiff, formal-looking document addressed simply to current occupants. Annoyed, she ripped it open, expecting it to be junk mail. But the wording was dense, legal. It was a formal notice of corporate lease termination and order to vacate property. She scanned the document, her anger turning to confusion. It stated that the corporate lease agreement on the property was terminated, effective immediately, following the termination of employment of Daniel Dubois. It cited clauses and bylaws she didn't understand, and it concluded with a chilling sentence. All current occupants are hereby ordered to vacate the premises within 48 hours, after which time the property will be reclaimed by its legal owner, Chestnut Lane Holdings, LLC. Chestnut Lane Holdings, LLC? She had never heard of them. This had to be a mistake, a bureaucratic screw-up from Daniel's old company. She laughed, a short, sharp, humorless sound. What perfect timing! Another piece of ammunition for her lawyer. Not only was Daniel trying to starve her financially, but now his former company was trying to make her homeless through their own incompetence. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Marcus Dubois stared at a letter from the Internal Revenue Service. His face, usually a mask of smug confidence, was pale and slick with sweat. It wasn't a standard inquiry. It was a notice of a full-scale, comprehensive forensic audit of both his personal finances and his business dealings for the last 5 years. The letter mentioned an anonymous but highly detailed and credible tip regarding securities fraud, undeclared offshore accounts, and systematic tax evasion. It listed specific transactions he thought were buried so deep no one would ever find them. This wasn't a random audit, this was a targeted attack. Someone had sold him out. His phone rang. It was Clara, her voice hysterical. "Marcus, you won't believe the day I'm having. The bank cards are cut off, and now I've gotten some insane eviction notice." "Clara, shut up and listen to me," he hissed, his voice tight with panic. "I have bigger problems. The IRS is auditing me. Everything. Someone talked." Clara's own problems were momentarily forgotten. "What? Who would... Daniel?" "Daniel." Marcus laughed, a raw, panicked sound. "Don't be an idiot. Daniel doesn't have the brains or the guts. He wouldn't even know where to begin. This is a professional hit. Someone I did business with must have turned on me." The siblings, for the first time, felt a genuine tremor of fear. Their perfect, well-ordered world, built on a foundation of arrogance and shady dealings, was beginning to crack. But they still couldn't see the architect of their destruction. They were so blinded by their own contempt for Daniel that they couldn't conceive he was anything other than a pathetic victim, a footnote in their own glorious story. They had no idea that the footnote was now writing the entire book. The mediation room was designed to be neutral, but it felt like a battlefield. The air was thick with tension, the polished mahogany table a stark dividing line. On one side sat Clara, flanked by her lawyer, a slick, overconfident man named Gregory Finch. Clara looked smug, her brief panic from the previous weeks having settled back into a simmering, righteous anger. She saw this as the final act where she would be vindicated and rewarded. She had spent the last month in a frustrating hell. The eviction notice had turned out to be terrifyingly real, forcing her to temporarily move in with a panicking Marcus while her lawyer fought a legal battle against a faceless LLC that wouldn't communicate. Her friends had grown distant, tired of her constant drama and financial woes, but today it would all be worth it. Today she would get everything. The door opened and Daniel walked in. He looked different. He was thinner perhaps, but he stood straighter. The hesitant, apologetic air he used to carry was gone, replaced by a quiet, unnerving calm. He was followed by a man who radiated power and precision, Robert Harrison. Clara scoffed. So Daniel had scraped together enough money for a real lawyer. It wouldn't matter. They all took their seats. Gregory Finch began, his voice oozing condescension. "Let's make this simple," he said, spreading a set of papers on the table. "My client, Mr. Dubois, was terminated from his long-term employment. He has no significant income or prospects. My client, Madame Dubois, on the other hand, has sacrificed her own career potential for a decade to support him and maintain their home, a home which, due to his employer's gross negligence, is now in legal limbo." He slid a proposal across the table. "We are demanding the full title to the house once the legal ownership is sorted out. We are also demanding 70% of all liquid assets and a significant alimony package for a period of no less than 10 years to compensate for my client's diminished earning capacity." Clara sat back, a triumphant smile on her face. It was a brutal, aggressive demand designed to crush Daniel completely. Daniel and Harrison listened patiently, their faces impassive. When Finch was finished, a heavy silence filled the room. Harrison let it hang there for a long moment before he spoke, his voice calm and measured. "Mr. Finch," he began, "that is a fascinating work of fiction. Now allow me to introduce you to reality." With a quiet, deliberate motion, Harrison placed his own leather briefcase on the table. He opened it and began to lay out documents one by one, like a dealer laying out a winning hand. "Document 1, he said, placing a paper in the center of the table. "This is the notice of termination for Mr. Dubois. As you can see, it is a termination without cause as part of a corporate acquisition." He then laid down a second, much thicker, document. "This is the severance package you have so casually dismissed. It is in fact a multi-million-dollar buyout agreement with Orion Global Acquisitions. I've highlighted the final lump sum payment and the value of the vested stock options for your convenience." Clara and Finch leaned forward. Clara's eyes widened, her brain struggling to process the numbers. The zeros seemed to stretch on for an eternity. Millions, tens of millions. Her smug smile faltered, replaced by a slack-jawed look of disbelief.
That's impossible," Finch stammered, his professional composure cracking. "He's unemployed." "My client is not unemployed," Harrison corrected him coolly. "He is retired, very, very comfortably, which brings me to my next point." He slid a third document onto the pile. "This is the deed and trust agreement for the property at 124 Chestnut Lane. It is not in legal limbo. It is, and has been since the day of my client's termination, the sole and exclusive property of a trust for which Mr. Dubois is the one and only beneficiary." He looked directly at Clara, his eyes cold as ice. "You were not in your home, Madame Dubois. You were a tenant in my client's property, a tenant who has been legally evicted." The room was utterly silent, save for Clara's ragged breathing. The entire foundation of her world, her entire case, her entire future had just been vaporized in under 60 seconds.
She looked at Daniel, truly looked at him, and saw not the pathetic failure she had cast aside, but a titan of wealth and power who had been hiding in plain sight. Then Daniel spoke. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the atmosphere like a blade. It was a voice she had never heard before, cold, authoritative, and utterly devoid of the warmth he had once shown her. "You spent 10 years treating me like I was a stepping stone, Clara," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. "You belittled my work, you mocked my ambition, you stood by and smiled while your family insulted me. You thought I was small." He leaned forward slightly, the movement full of quiet menace. "You filed for divorce on the single worst day of my life. You threw me out of my home with nothing but the clothes on my back. You laughed with your brother about how you were going to take everything from me. You saw my firing as your golden opportunity." A single harsh laugh escaped his lips. "But what you didn't know, Clara, was that my firing was my golden opportunity. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. It set me free from the company, from the life I was pretending to enjoy, and most of all, from you." The truth, in all its brutal glory, finally crashed down upon her. The money, the house, the power, it was all his. She had thrown away a winning lottery ticket moments before the numbers were called. A choked, guttural sound escaped her throat. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, you're lying. This is a trick." Her voice rose to a hysterical shriek. "You did this to me. You hid this from me. That money is half mine. I'm your wife." "You were my wife," Daniel corrected her, his voice chillingly calm. "Until you decided I was worthless. You made your choice, Clara. You chose to bet against me. And you lost." "You monster!" she screamed, tears of rage and despair streaming down her face. She lunged across the table, her hands clawing for the papers, for Daniel, for anything. Finch grabbed her, trying to restrain her, as she collapsed into a sobbing, shrieking mess. "It's not fair! It's mine! Mine!" Daniel stood up, his face a mask of cold indifference. He looked down at the pathetic, broken woman who had been his wife, a woman completely destroyed by her own greed. He felt nothing. No pity, no anger, no love, just emptiness. "The divorce is granted," he said to the room at large. "You get nothing, Clara, not a single cent. The house is mine. Your brother's legal troubles are his own. You have built a life on a foundation of contempt, and now you can live in its ruins." He turned, and without a backward glance, walked out of the room. Harrison gathered the papers, gave a curt nod to the stunned and useless Gregory Finch, and followed him. The sounds of Clara's unhinged sobbing echoed down the hallway, the final, pathetic anthem of her own self-destruction. The aftermath was swift and total. Stripped of any claim to Daniel's fortune, and with no assets of her own, Clara was left with nothing but a mountain of debt and public humiliation. Her high society friends, who had only ever been attracted to her wealth and status, abandoned her without a second thought. She was a pariah, a cautionary tale whispered about at cocktail parties. Forced to sell her designer clothes and jewelry for a fraction of their worth, she had no choice but to move into the cramped, spare bedroom of her brother's rapidly shrinking apartment. Marcus himself was a man besieged. The IRS audit had unearthed years of systematic fraud, leading to crippling fines, the revocation of his financial licenses, and the complete collapse of his business. The swaggering, arrogant man was reduced to a pale, terrified shell, staring at the prospect of impending bankruptcy and potential prison time. Their shared apartment became a toxic prison of resentment and blame. They, who had once toasted to Daniel's downfall, now spent their days shouting at each other, two scorpions trapped in a bottle, each blaming the other for their spectacular fall from grace. It was a miserable, squalid existence, a perfect mirror of the life they had once looked down upon with such disdain. Daniel, however, did not indulge in the life of a typical multimillionaire. He had no interest in yachts, mansions, or the shallow world that Clara had so desperately craved. That life had always felt like an ill-fitting costume. He sold the ostentatious house on Chestnut Lane, the site of his greatest humiliation and his greatest victory, and instructed Harrison to invest the proceeds. He kept his modest apartment overlooking the park. He found that simple quietude was a luxury far greater than any material possession. The true wealth, he realized, was not in the staggering numbers in his bank account, but in the freedom he now possessed, freedom from expectation, from judgment, and from the crushing weight of a toxic relationship. But he knew the money had to have a purpose beyond his own comfort. The memory of his own firing, the feeling of being deemed redundant after years of loyal service, had left a permanent mark. He wanted to create something good from the ashes of that pain. With Harrison's legal guidance, he used a significant portion of his fortune to establish the Phoenix Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to providing free vocational training and job placement services for skilled workers laid off due to corporate restructuring. He funded workshops for resume building, interview skills, and retraining in new, in-demand technologies. He wanted to give others the second chance that he had been so miraculously granted. He didn't just fund it, he became personally involved. He found a deep, abiding satisfaction in rolling up his sleeves and working alongside the people his foundation was helping. He would listen to their stories, offer advice, and share his own experience of being cast aside. He wasn't a distant benefactor. He was one of them, a man who understood the sting of being told you were no longer valuable. Months passed. The foundation flourished, becoming a beacon of hope in the community. Daniel found a sense of purpose he had never known in his 15 years at the firm. He was building something real, something that mattered. One Saturday afternoon, while helping set up for a community workshop, he was struggling to move a heavy table. A gentle voice behind him said, "Here, Let me give you a hand with that." He turned to see a woman with warm, intelligent eyes and a kind smile. She was dressed in simple, practical clothes, and her hands were smudged with whiteboard marker ink. "I'm Sophie," she said, easily taking one end of the table. "I'm volunteering to lead the digital literacy seminar today." "Daniel," he replied, smiling back. "Thank you." They worked together for the rest of the afternoon, their conversation easy and natural. She was a teacher, and she volunteered her weekends because she believed in giving people the tools to rebuild their lives. She was funny, genuine, and completely unimpressed by titles or wealth. She saw him simply as Daniel, a fellow volunteer. After the workshop, as they were cleaning up, he found the courage to ask, "Would you, maybe, like to get a coffee sometime? As a thank you for helping with the table." Sophie's smile widened. "I'd like that very much." They went to a small, quiet cafe down the street. They talked for hours, not about money or status, but about books, dreams, and the simple joy of helping others. For the first time in over a decade, Daniel felt a connection that was honest and real. It was the start of something new, something built not on ambition or appearances, but on a foundation of shared values and mutual respect. As he walked home that evening, a profound sense of peace settled over him. He had lost a job, a wife, and a life he thought he was supposed to want. But in losing it all, he had found himself. True wealth, he now understood, was not measured in dollars or stock prices. It was measured in integrity, in purpose, and in the quiet courage to be true to oneself. Clara had been a prisoner of her own greed, a slave to the glittering facade of success. He was finally truly free.